You can rebuild a house after a storm, but how do you rebuild a heart after betrayal? The question echoed through the courtroom as Caroline Hayes stood across from Mason Reed, the man she once believed would never hurt her. Their marriage certificate had turned into divorce papers. Their vows had become legal statements, and the man who once promised her forever was now just another stranger signing his name to the end of their story. Mason's eyes searched hers, desperate, pleading, but Caroline's gaze held nothing. No hate, no tears, just the quiet of someone who had already walked away long before this moment. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that inside these walls, love had just taken its last breath. This isn't a story about losing someone. It's a story about finally choosing yourself. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. Tonight's story is called 7 Years and One Betrayal. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the city courthouse, slicing across polished oak floors and illuminating the stillness that clung to the room. The world outside hummed with life. But in here, time had slowed, trapped between two people who once swore they'd never let go. Caroline Hayes stood across from Mason Reed, her posture calm yet distant. Between them on the mahogany table lay a single sheet of paper, the divorce agreement. The same hands that had once exchanged rings were now poised to sign their names beneath the word irreconcilable. Mason's gaze drifted over the document until it landed on one line that cut deeper than any blade. Reason, infidelity. His chest tightened as if the air had been sucked from the room. He looked up at her, searching for something, maybe a trace of warmth, or the hint of forgiveness that used to live in her eyes. But there was nothing, only the still, unreadable expression of a woman who had made peace with her pain. The judge spoke softly, his voice echoing off marble walls. "Mr. Reed, Mrs. Reed, are you both certain you wish to proceed?" Caroline nodded without hesitation. Mason didn't move. His throat worked, but no words came out. For a man who'd conquered boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar contracts, this, losing her, was a battle he couldn't win. The pen trembled in his hand. Caroline watched him quietly, her features illuminated by the light spilling through the window. She wasn't cold, but she was resolute. There was no anger left in her, no bitterness. Only the calm that comes when love dies, and there's nothing left to fight for. Mason broke the silence first. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "So this is it?" Caroline's tone was even, steady. "It's been over for a while, Mason. We're just signing what's already broken." Her words hit harder than any accusation. He looked down again, the words reason, infidelity blurring as his vision stung. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. He wanted to say it didn't mean anything, that Evan Turner had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. But deep down he knew it wouldn't matter. Some lines, once crossed, can't be redrawn. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. Two souls standing on opposite sides of an ending. The silence between them said everything words never could. Regret, exhaustion, and a love that had run out of chances. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, like the sky itself was mourning the final breath of what they once were. Mason's pen finally touched the paper. The sound of ink scratching against parchment was faint, but it felt deafening. Caroline signed next, her movements graceful, final. When the clerk took the papers away, Mason exhaled, a shaky breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The judge's voice broke through the tension. "The court acknowledges the dissolution of marriage between Mason Reed and Caroline Hayes. You are now legally divorced." Caroline gave a polite nod, then gathered her purse. She didn't glance at Mason as she turned toward the exit. He watched her walk away, the woman who had once been his reason to come home, now walking out of his life without hesitation. As the courtroom door closed behind her, the sound echoed like the final note of a symphony that had played too long. Mason sat there, motionless, his reflection caught in the glass, a man stripped of everything but regret. And as the rain outside blurred the city skyline, the narrator's voice lingered, soft and haunting. A week ago, they were still husband and wife, 7 years of love, 5 of happiness, and 1 betrayal that changed everything. The camera of memory shifted, colors fading into the warm tones of the past. The cafe, the laughter, the beginning of their story. The present dissolved, and time rewound to when love was new and untouched. The courtroom air still lingered heavy with tension. But for a moment, Caroline's mind drifted away from the present, back to a time when love had felt like an endless horizon. 7 years ago, she had been a college student, balancing studies and a part-time job at a quaint cafe tucked on a quiet street near Mason's architectural firm. Life was simpler then, yet every day carried the quiet hope of something extraordinary waiting to unfold. Mason Reed was a frequent customer. The first time Caroline noticed him, he had left behind a neatly stacked pile of architectural blueprints, slightly curled at the edges. She had chased him down the street, heart pounding, clutching the papers. He had turned, a little startled, then smiled. One of those smiles that seemed to pull the world in closer. "Thank you," he said, his voice smooth, yet laced with something unspoken, something curious. That fleeting encounter had ignited the spark that neither of them knew would blaze into a fire consuming years of their lives. In the beginning, their interactions were small, almost mundane. Mason would linger over a cup of coffee longer than necessary. Caroline would tease him about his stubborn preference for extra foam, and slowly, the casual greetings turned into long conversations. He talked about his projects, his dreams for buildings that could breathe life into cities. She shared her hopes, her struggles juggling school and work. In those exchanges, a quiet intimacy grew, a bond that neither distance nor ambition could sever. Over months, their connection deepened. Caroline discovered Mason's laughter could fill a room, and Mason realized that her presence alone could calm his restless mind. He would stop by the cafe just to see her, leaving the blueprints behind, unspoken confessions hidden in the margins of his sketches. One evening, when the sunset painted the cafe in amber and rose, Mason leaned closer, voice low yet urgent. "I think I've been looking for you, without even knowing it." Caroline's heart had skipped a beat, and in that suspended moment, the world seemed to align around them. Life, however, was never without trials. Caroline faced grueling exams, financial stress, and the uncertainty of a future that seemed too vast to navigate. Mason, despite his rising success as a young CEO, bore the pressures of a demanding career, clients with impossible expectations, and the constant scrutiny of an industry that left little room for mistakes. Yet, together they became each other's anchor. Late nights spent poring over notes or design models were softened by shared laughter and whispered encouragement. "We'll get through this," Mason would say, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, and Caroline would believe him with all her heart. 5 years passed, and the casual strolls along tree-lined streets, the stolen coffee breaks, and the quiet dinners in their tiny apartment culminated in a moment neither would forget. Mason had planned it meticulously, every detail reflecting the depth of his love and the years they had spent building a life together. In a sun-drenched garden surrounded by friends and family, Caroline walked down the aisle, heart thundering in rhythm with every step. Mason stood waiting, a vision of calm certainty, yet his eyes betrayed the storm of emotion within. When their hands finally met, and their vows intertwined like two melodies finding harmony, it felt like the world itself paused to witness their union. Their wedding was not just a celebration of love. It was a testament to endurance, to the quiet strength that had held them together through trials and triumphs alike. The youthful exuberance that had first drawn them to each other now matured into a profound, unwavering commitment. Every glance, every touch, carried the weight of shared history, of dreams realized and sacrifices made. For Caroline, those days were the pinnacle of her youth, a period of her life where love seemed infinite, unstoppable, a force that could bend time itself. Yet, even amidst the bliss, life's unpredictable currents began to stir. Hints of future storms were subtle, almost imperceptible. A fleeting irritation over forgotten dinners, a shadowed glance across a crowded room, a word left unsaid that carried more weight than either could express. But at that moment, in that golden haze of wedding laughter and whispered promises, Neither acknowledged the darkness looming on the horizon. They only felt the pulse of now, the exhilarating certainty that they had found something rare, something worth holding on to forever. As Caroline's memories faded, the courtroom returned to focus, cold and unyielding, but the recollection of their beginning, the chance encounter, the shared dreams, the laughter and tender whispers, remained vivid, almost painful in its beauty. It reminded her of what had once been perfect, what had once made her heart soar, and what, perhaps, she had lost along the way. The memory of their wedding lingered like a golden glow in Caroline's mind as she returned from the garden, back to the reality of a shared life with Mason. The years that followed had been filled with quiet mornings, shared ambitions, and dreams they had meticulously built together. Love had seemed untouchable, a fortress around their hearts, and yet, the 7th year brought with it both the brightest joys and the deepest betrayals. It began with a flutter, soft and secretive that Caroline could barely believe. A test taken in the solitude of their small bathroom confirmed it. She was 3 weeks pregnant. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming surge of happiness. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. The smile on Mason's face, the warmth of his arms, the simple joy of sharing this news with the man she loved more than life itself. She wanted to tell him in a way that would leave him speechless, a surprise that would forever be etched in their story. Caroline prepared meticulously. She spent the afternoon crafting a small feast, Mason's favorite dishes presented on delicate plates, each one a token of her love. Alongside the food, she placed a tiny pair of baby shoes, pink and white, the smallest symbol of the life growing within her. Her heart swelled with anticipation as she imagined his reaction. The laugh that would turn into a gasp of wonder, the embrace that would carry them both into a new chapter of their lives. But then came the message, simple and brief, that shattered her anticipation. "I'm busy with a major project. I'll be late." No hint of excitement, no trace of the shared thrill she had imagined. Caroline stared at the screen, stomach twisting, yet she refused to let it dampen her joy. She decided she would go to his office anyway. She wanted him to feel the surprise, to see that even in his absence, love persisted, unwavering and patient. The evening air was thick with a soft drizzle as Caroline walked through the quiet streets toward Mason's firm. Each step carried hope, each heartbeat a drum of longing. When she arrived, the lobby was empty, the usual hum of employees gone, leaving a strange, silent anticipation. She carried the bag of carefully prepared meals, the small gift tucked inside her coat, and made her way toward Mason's office, her excitement almost palpable. She paused at the door, hand hovering over the handle, when a movement behind the glass caught her attention. Her breath hitched. Through the narrow slit of the office window she saw him. Mason, the man she had loved fiercely for 7 years, was no longer alone. Evan Turner, the young new secretary with a polite smile and steady hands, was wrapped in his arms. The image was fleeting, almost unreal, yet it burned itself into Caroline's eyes. Mason's lips were near Evan's hairline, his hands resting on her waist, as if the office itself had conspired to freeze that moment for eternity. The bag slipped from Caroline's fingers. A soft thud, then the crash of plates against the polished floor, her carefully prepared food scattered, the tiny baby shoes rolling under the desk, a cruel mirror to the pieces of her heart. For a moment, the world seemed suspended, the drizzle outside a muted witness to the silent collapse of her dreams. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind screamed for denial, for logic, for any reason to escape this unbearable truth. Yet there it was, clear, undeniable, the reality of betrayal. Caroline's legs carried her back through the lobby, each step heavier than the last. The rain greeted her as she stepped outside, a cold and relentless mirror to the storm raging within her. Tears mixed with the downpour, blurring the city lights into streaks of sorrow and disbelief. She ran without direction, the bag long forgotten, her body trembling with grief and rage. The life she had imagined with Mason, the laughter, the quiet mornings, the tiny heartbeat that now grew within her, felt ripped away, replaced by the raw ache of infidelity. The night offered no solace. Caroline found herself under the glow of a street lamp. rain plastering her hair to her face, shoulders heaving with silent sobs. She thought of the first day they had met, the blueprint she had chased him for, the small cafe where laughter had sparked and love had grown. Every memory now felt like a knife, twisting the joy of the past into the torment of the present. Her hands touched her stomach instinctively, as if to remind herself that within her, a new life still clung to hope, but even that tiny miracle seemed overshadowed by Mason's betrayal. Hours later, Caroline returned home, soaked and hollow, unable to face anyone. She lay on the edge of their bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the image over and over. Mason, the man who had promised forever, now a stranger holding another woman, while she had prepared meals, planned surprises, nurtured life. The injustice of it, the intimacy of the betrayal, gnawed at her soul. She felt anger, sorrow, disbelief, and yet beneath it all, a flicker of determination began to ignite. This life inside her, innocent, pure, could not be touched by his mistakes. It would be her anchor, her reason, her secret joy amid the storm of heartbreak. The following days blurred into a haze of muted colors and heavy silences. Caroline avoided Mason's calls, each vibration of her phone a knife twisting in her chest. Yet she could not entirely sever the connection. The house, their home, carried traces of him in every corner. The faint scent of his cologne, the chair by the kitchen table where he always sat, the way the morning light fell across the living room just like it used to when they had laughed together. It was cruel to live surrounded by fragments of love now poisoned by deceit. But Caroline was not powerless. She began to reclaim her life. Small acts of defiance and courage. Finishing projects she had put aside. Revisiting friends she had neglected. Walking through the city with head held high despite the pounding of her own heart. And through it all, she protected the life growing inside her, whispering promises of love and hope, even if the world felt heavy and uncertain. The betrayal had fractured her world, but it had not extinguished her spirit. Yet the memory of that rainy night, the image of Mason in another woman's embrace, the crash of her dreams across the polished floor would haunt her. It was a wound that would not close easily, a truth that she could not ignore. And as the rain tapped against the windows, as shadows stretched across empty hallways, Caroline understood that this was the moment when innocence ended and resilience began. She had loved deeply, been hurt irreparably, and now had to choose the next chapter, not dictated by Mason's betrayal, but by her own courage and by the fragile, precious heartbeat she carried within. The 7th year had begun with promise, yet ended in heartbreak. But in the midst of pain, Caroline realized something vital. Love, true love, was not only the joy of shared moments, but the strength to rise when the world fell apart. And even in the shadow of betrayal, she would rise. The memory of that rainy night haunted Caroline as the dawn approached. Mason had not returned home, leaving the house silent except for the soft rhythm of her own breathing and the quiet patter of the rain on the window. She sat alone on the worn armchair, the weight of the events pressing down on her like a storm cloud that refused to pass. Her hands rested instinctively over the small curve of her belly, where the life growing inside her seemed to pulse with fragile determination, untouched by betrayal but caught in the shadow of heartbreak. Hours passed in silence. Caroline's mind replayed every detail, every stolen glance through the office window, every fleeting touch between Mason and Evan. The images clawed at her chest, intertwining with memories of laughter, love, and shared dreams. She thought of their first encounter outside the cafe, the late nights spent supporting each other's ambitions, the wedding that had felt like a promise unbreakable. And yet, here she was, facing the stark reality that the man who had once held her world together had chosen someone else, leaving the sanctity of their home and the trust they had built in ruins. The night stretched endlessly. Caroline moved through the house as if in a trance, her fingers brushing over the furniture, each touch a reminder of what they had shared. She opened the kitchen cabinets, rearranged the dishes mechanically, and then stopped by the window to watch the city glisten under the rain. Somewhere in that vast expanse, Mason was out there, indifferent to the storm he had left behind, unaware of the turmoil etched across her face and the fragile life she carried. Her thoughts were relentless. She imagined confronting him, demanding explanations, pleading for the truth. Yet even as the words formed in her mind, she knew they would not erase the image of his betrayal. Every scenario seemed hollow, every potential conversation a mirror reflecting the same painful truth. She wondered how love could twist into such agony, how the heart could harbor both the deepest joy and the sharpest pain simultaneously. Caroline's hands clenched over her abdomen. "How could you do this?" she whispered to the empty room. A question that demanded no answer. A confession that needed no witness. The life growing within her deserved more than this fractured world. It deserved a future untainted by lies and betrayal. The thought hardened her resolve, cutting through the fog of despair. She realized that to protect herself, and the tiny heartbeat that had become her anchor, she had to act, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. The hours passed slowly, and with each tick of the clock, Caroline felt the weight of the night's decisions pressing heavier. Should she forgive? Could love truly overcome the betrayal she had witnessed? Her heart wanted to cling to the fragments of what once was, but her mind, clear and unyielding, reminded her that some wounds could not be stitched over with apologies or empty promises. Forgiveness was a gift she could not offer to someone who had broken not just her heart, but the very foundation of their shared life. As the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, painting the room in soft hues of pale gold and silver, clarity settled over Caroline. She understood what she had to do. Rising from the armchair, she walked to the desk, the wooden surface scarred with years of shared plans and notes. Her hands moved deliberately, pulling paper from the drawer, pen poised, heart steady despite the tremor of emotion coursing through her. She began to write, each word a careful measure of sorrow, strength, and finality. The ink on the page formed a bridge between the love she had cherished and the life she intended to reclaim for herself. The divorce petition was more than a legal document. It was a declaration of survival, a shield for the life growing within her, and a boundary that Mason could no longer cross. Caroline wrote with precision, detailing the inevitability of separation, the impossibility of reconciliation given the breach of trust, and the necessity of moving forward independently. Each sentence carried the weight of her experiences, the memory of betrayal, and the glimmer of hope that the future could hold something better, something unbroken. When the final word was penned, Caroline paused. She stared at the paper, the ink still glistening slightly under the morning light. There was sorrow, certainly, but there was also a fierce pride, a recognition of her own strength. She had loved fully, trusted deeply, and now, even in the wake of unimaginable hurt, she was choosing life on her own terms. The life within her had given her courage she had never known she possessed, a quiet, steady flame that would not be extinguished by deceit or heartbreak. Caroline placed the petition carefully on the desk, leaving it in plain sight. She did not hide it, nor did she make any attempt to delay what needed to happen. The decision was made, final yet not cruel. It was an act of self-preservation and love for the life that had yet to speak its first words. She moved to the window once more, watching the sun rise higher, casting warm light over the city streets, illuminating possibilities she had not yet allowed herself to imagine. In that moment, Caroline felt a mixture of grief and liberation. The past 7 years had been a tapestry of joy, ambition, and heartbreak, and now, with the dawn breaking over the horizon, she was ready to turn the page. The pain would remain, lingering like a shadow in quiet moments, but it would not define her. Her future, and the life she carried within her, was hers to shape. As she sat back in the chair, hands resting lightly over her belly, Caroline allowed herself a single, shuddering breath of release. She thought of Mason, and for the first time in days, she felt no anger or desire for confrontation. There was only a calm, resolute understanding that love, in its truest form, also meant protecting oneself and those who depended on her. The room was quiet, the air still tinged with the memory of night's storm. Caroline closed her eyes, listening to the subtle rhythm of her own heartbeat, feeling the faint, steady pulse of the new life within her. The divorce petition remained on the desk, a silent testament to her strength, her choice, and the unyielding courage it had taken to arrive at this moment. The first rays of sunlight filled the room, illuminating her path forward. Caroline knew the journey ahead would not be easy, and that scars, both visible and hidden, would accompany her steps. Yet, in the clarity of morning, she understood that leaving Mason was not an end. It was a beginning. A beginning for herself, for her child, and for a life that, despite heartbreak, held the promise of hope, love, and renewal. And as the city stirred to life outside her window, Caroline made a quiet vow to herself, to live, to love again, and to build a future where betrayal could never shadow the warmth of hope she carried in her heart. Today marked the end of a chapter, and the unwavering start of a new story. One written by her own hand, guided by her own strength, and illuminated by the fragile, unbreakable light of new life. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long, narrow stripes of light across the living room. Caroline had spent the night wrestling with every ounce of emotion within her. Grief, anger, sorrow, but also the quiet, unyielding strength that had carried her through the storm. By dawn, clarity had settled in, and the divorce petition lay neatly on the desk, a silent testament to her decision. She had made her choice, and now she had only to face the consequences. Meanwhile, Mason stumbled through the front door, exhausted from another night buried in projects and client meetings. His shoes were muddy from the wet streets, and his tie hung loosely around his neck. He expected Caroline to greet him with a glare, perhaps a teasing remark about his long absence, maybe even a playful reprimand. He smiled at the thought, imagining the warmth of her voice, the tilt of her head as she shook it at him, pretending to be annoyed. He set down his briefcase, loosened his coat, and let out a tired sigh, not noticing the strange stillness in the apartment. Caroline sat on the armchair by the window, her posture calm, composed, but cold. Her eyes did not move from the desk. The paper in front of her caught the morning light, and its presence radiated finality. Mason paused, the playful smile fading as he noticed her rigid posture. Something was off. He cleared his throat and stepped closer. "Caroline?" he began lightly, trying to inject warmth into his voice. But the tone felt hollow against her unwavering silence. He approached the desk and froze. The divorce petition lay there, immaculate and deliberate, the words sharp and unambiguous. Mason's hands trembled as he picked it up, scanning the first lines. What is this, Caroline?" His voice cracked slightly, a mixture of disbelief and panic creeping in. Caroline finally spoke, her voice measured, calm and sharp. "You'll know when you read it." He looked at her, searching her face for signs of jest, of anger softened into a joke, but found none. Panic surged, the familiar control he wielded over his life slipping from his grasp. No, you don't understand. I don't love her. It was a moment of weakness, nothing more." His voice rose, faltering under the weight of urgency. Caroline's expression remained impassive. "A single moment of weakness is enough to destroy the trust we built over 7 years, she said. The words cut through the space between them like shards of glass, leaving silence in their wake. Mason's chest tightened with indignation, a reflexive need to defend himself. "You think I've been cruel? Caroline, I gave you everything. House, security, freedom to follow your dreams. Everything you wanted, everything I could provide. What more could you possibly ask for?" His tone softened slightly, shifting into persuasion, a man who still believed love could be salvaged with words. "Caroline, after 7 years, the woman I've loved all this time. That's you. Don't let one mistake, one fleeting lapse, destroy everything we've built together." Caroline remained seated, eyes steady on him. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, betraying no tremor, no hesitation. "It is precisely because of those 7 years that I want to end this gently. I cannot live with someone who betrayed me. I will not let a single error erase the dignity of what we had, nor compromise the life I carry within me." Her voice was calm, but the depth of finality in it reverberated through the room. Mason's attempts to reach her faltered. He stepped closer, his own frustration mounting, his control slipping further. "Caroline, please. I can make it right. I can prove that it was nothing, I swear. You're the only one I've ever loved. This doesn't have to be the end." She looked at him then, her gaze unwavering, her posture serene yet unyielding. "I've already made my choice," she said. "This isn't about love anymore. It's about respect, about trust, about protecting the life growing inside me. There is no righting a wrong like this. Not for us." Mason's expression flickered between disbelief, anger, and desperation. His hands tightened into fists, the last threads of his composure straining against the tidal wave of loss. "You can't just leave. You know you need me. You know everything I've done. Everything I've given you." His voice trembled, a mix of fury and pleading. Caroline slowly rose from the chair, standing tall and resolute. Her shadow stretched long across the floor, a figure carved by strength and heartbreak. She met his gaze directly. "I don't need what you give. I need trust. I need honesty. I need to know that the person I love isn't capable of betraying me. I loved you fully, Mason. But loving you doesn't mean I have to destroy myself in the process." A heavy silence filled the room. Mason sank into the nearest chair, the weight of reality pressing upon him. He looked at her, at the divorce petition on the desk, at the empty space she would soon leave behind. And for the first time, he understood that control, wealth, and power could not mend what had been broken. Caroline gathered her coat and her small bag, pausing only briefly at the doorway. Her gaze lingered on Mason, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. "Goodbye, Mason. I hope someday you understand what you've lost." She walked out, her steps measured, echoing softly against the floor, leaving behind a man who had thought he could manipulate the course of their lives with charm and wealth, now confronted with the irrevocable consequences of his actions. Mason remained seated, staring at the desk, at the petition, at the empty space where Caroline had just stood. The room felt hollow, the light of the morning unable to fill the void that her absence created. For a long time, he simply stared, the echoes of her words and the certainty in her eyes resonating in his mind. Finally, with a trembling hand, Mason picked up a pen. He signed the papers, his signature deliberate, almost mechanical. Even in this act of legal finality, he held on to a fragile hope, a hope that perhaps, against all reason, she might return. Deep down, he could not yet accept that love, once broken in such a profound way, might never be restored. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the quiet apocalypse that had occurred within the walls of a single apartment. Caroline's figure disappeared into the morning light, the rain from the night before leaving the streets wet and glistening. Each step she took was a statement of strength, a declaration of self-respect, and a promise to the life she carried. Inside, Mason slumped back into the chair, staring at the signed petition, the reality settling over him like a heavy fog. He had wealth, power, and everything he had thought defined love, yet he had lost the one person who had given him heart and soul. The bitter irony was unmistakable. The man who had everything was suddenly left with nothing. Caroline's departure marked more than a separation. It marked a transformation. She would navigate the world anew, guided by her own courage and by the unwavering light of the new life she nurtured. Mason's shock and despair would echo, a reminder of the consequences of betrayal, while Caroline moved forward, stepping into a future she had chosen, unshaken by the past, resilient and unbroken. In that morning of fateful clarity, two lives diverged, one in denial and desperation, the other in strength and resolution. And though the echoes of love lingered in the air, Caroline's steps carried the undeniable message. Some chapters must end to make way for the life that truly belongs to us. A week had passed since the morning that had changed everything. Caroline woke up that day with a quiet resolve, the petition she had left on the desk no longer a symbol of anger, but of clarity. Today the final step would be taken, an act of closure, of liberation, of turning the page on a chapter written in love. Pain and betrayal. The courthouse loomed ahead, its gray stone facade imposing yet neutral, indifferent to the private storms it would witness within. Mason arrived first, as always impeccably dressed, a mixture of apprehension and lingering pride on his face. Caroline followed, her movements measured, her expression calm, almost serene. Between them stretched the invisible bridge of 7 years. Memories, laughter, sorrow, betrayal, all colliding silently in the space they now shared. Inside, the atmosphere was formal, yet every glance, every subtle gesture carried weight beyond the legalities. They sat side by side, paper and pen before them, the past and present intertwining in their minds. Caroline's thoughts drifted to the cafe where it all began, to the long nights they had spent dreaming of a future together, to the laughter and warmth that had once seemed unshakable. The memories flashed in parallel with the sterile, cold room they now occupied, a juxtaposition of love's beginnings and its painful end. Mason's hand hovered over the papers, hesitation visible in the faint tremor of his fingers. He glanced at Caroline, expecting perhaps a spark of emotion, a flicker of longing, but found only a composed, steady gaze. Caroline's eyes met his briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the shared history, and then returned to the documents. The act of signing became a ritual, deliberate and final. Caroline picked up the pen first, her movements graceful, unwavering. The ink flowed smoothly, each stroke a quiet assertion of independence, a declaration that she would no longer be bound by betrayal. She signed with precision, the sound of the pen scratching against paper almost deafening in its symbolic significance. Once finished, she laid the pen down, eyes forward, never looking back at Mason, never allowing herself the temptation of a glance that could betray the peace she had cultivated within. Mason followed, his signature slower, weighed down by regret. He kept his gaze fixed on the paper, unwilling or perhaps unable to meet hers. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, aching sense of loss. In the silence, the air seemed heavy, carrying with it the ghosts of their past, the echoes of love that had once been vibrant, now faded into memory. The moment stretched, slow and deliberate, as if time itself had slowed to honor the finality of what was happening. Caroline rose from her seat with quiet dignity, moving toward the exit. Mason watched, the absence of her glance a reminder of the irrevocable choice she had made. She did not hurry. Each step was measured, deliberate, a dance of freedom that he could no longer influence. Outside, sunlight broke through the morning clouds, illuminating her path. The slow motion of the world seemed to capture every detail, the sway of her hair, the calm resolve in her eyes, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders. She moved through the courthouse doors with grace, the light casting a glow over her face, revealing serenity where once there had been sorrow and turmoil. Mason remained behind, seated and silent, the echo of her steps fading into the distance. He had all he had ever possessed: wealth, influence, control. But he was left powerless in the face of a heart that had chosen self-respect over reconciliation. The paper on the desk, now signed, was more than a legal document. It was the final marker of a love that had run its course, a reminder that some bonds, no matter how deep, can break when trust is lost. As Caroline stepped onto the street, the wind brushing gently against her face, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The pain of betrayal had not vanished entirely, but the clarity of her choice gave her strength. This was the end of a chapter, yes, but also the beginning of a new life. One she would navigate on her own terms, with courage, and with the unspoken promise that she would protect the life growing within her. The courthouse receded behind her, a neutral witness to the final act. Caroline walked into the morning light, each step steady, each breath deliberate. In the quiet determination that defined her, there was hope, there was resilience, and above all, there was the unwavering knowledge that some endings are necessary for the freedom of new beginnings. The courthouse doors had closed behind Caroline like a final punctuation mark in Mason's life. He remained in the shadow of that morning, staring at the signed papers, the reality of their separation sinking in with a weight heavier than any he had carried in his life. The home he had once shared with her, once filled with laughter, warmth, and the subtle rhythms of daily love, now felt cold and vast, like a cavern echoing with ghosts. Returning to the mansion, Mason stepped into silence. The grand foyer, once vibrant with Caroline's presence, the soft hum of music, the clatter of cups, the casual warmth of her voice, was now still. He wandered through the house, each room a reminder of everything he had taken for granted. The living room, with its pristine leather couches and high ceilings, offered no comfort. The kitchen, where she had spent countless hours preparing meals with quiet devotion, now seemed impossibly empty. Even the faint scent of herbs and spices that had lingered in the morning air was gone, leaving only cold marble and polished countertops. He sank into a chair near the kitchen, staring at the space where she had once moved with such ease, such presence, such life. The reality of her absence pressed down on him, yet he refused to fully acknowledge it. "She'll come back," he whispered to the empty room, a mantra meant more for himself than anyone else. "She can't live without me. She has to come back." The words felt hollow, echoing against the walls in a place where love had been replaced by emptiness. Days bled into nights, and Mason immersed himself in work, throwing himself into projects, meetings, client calls, and deadlines. The constant activity was a convenient illusion, a mask to hide the hollow ache that gnawed at him relentlessly. He told himself he was fine, that his life still had structure and purpose, but the mansion around him mocked the deception. Every corner, every photograph, every carefully curated object screamed of her absence. Every note, every small item left behind was a silent accusation, a reminder that love could be lost even when one had thought it eternal. In these moments, he found himself replaying the past, obsessing over the details, questioning every choice, every word, every glance. He imagined ways he could have stopped it, ways he could have convinced her to stay, ways he could undo the irreversibility of betrayal. Even when his mind created arguments and rationalizations for his actions, the truth was unavoidable. Caroline had left. The realization should have been crushing. Yet he clung stubbornly to a fragile hope, convinced that love, even wounded, even fractured, would find a way to draw her back. Meanwhile, Caroline had disappeared from the city, like a delicate wisp of wind, moving toward a quieter, simpler life. She rented a modest apartment, small but filled with light, where she could breathe without echoes of betrayal or reminders of loss. The space was hers alone, her sanctuary, a cocoon where she could nurture the new life within her and begin to rediscover herself. No grand gestures, no opulent surroundings, just peace, privacy, and the comforting rhythm of her own choices guiding her days. She spent mornings wandering the city streets, taking in the fresh air and the quiet beauty that existed beyond the walls of luxury and expectation. The cafes she visited were small, unpretentious, with the aroma of roasted coffee beans and the soft hum of conversation providing a comforting backdrop. For the first time in years, she moved without pretense, laughed without hesitation, and allowed herself moments of stillness that were free from the weight of a past that had demanded too much. Evenings were gentle and reflective. Caroline would sit by the window of her new apartment, watching the city lights flicker, the world moving without urgency, without expectation. She prepared meals for herself, sometimes simple, sometimes elaborate, always mindful of the life she carried within her. Each small act, watering a plant, setting a cup of tea on the windowsill, journaling her thoughts, was an affirmation of autonomy, a quiet rebellion against the storm Mason had left in his wake. Though physically distant, memories of Mason lingered like shadows, subtle yet persistent. She remembered the curve of his smile, the cadence of his laughter, the warmth of his hand in hers. Yet the sting of betrayal had reshaped those memories, no longer colored by love alone, but tinged with the sharp reminder of what trust once broken could not be fully repaired. Caroline embraced the duality, the beauty of the past and the necessity of moving forward. Each day was a balancing act, a gentle negotiation between remembrance and release. Back in the mansion, Mason's world remained consumed by absence. He continued to fill his days with work, meetings, and calls, yet each completed project, each signed contract, each accolade from colleagues felt hollow. He could not escape the empty echo of her laughter, the vivid image of her walking away, the certainty in her eyes that he had lost something far beyond his comprehension. At night, he found himself wandering the empty halls, standing in front of doors she would never open again, speaking her name into the shadows, as if uttering it could summon her back. The contrast between their lives could not have been more stark. Caroline, free yet grounded, moving gently into a life of her own making, and Mason, surrounded by wealth, yet imprisoned by regret, chasing illusions of reconciliation that he had no right to demand. The narrative of 7 years of love, ambition, and heartbreak had diverged, each path marked by choices, consequences, and the subtle reclamation of self. And yet, even in solitude, Mason clung to a fragile illusion that Caroline would eventually return. He told himself that the bond they had shared was unbreakable, that her departure was temporary, that love could overcome even betrayal. He refused to see the clarity in her steps, the determination in her resolve, the quiet strength in the life she was building without him. In his mansion, filled with all the trappings of power and success, he remained a man haunted by the absence of the one woman who had truly mattered, trapped in the illusion that he could control a heart no longer his. For Caroline, each day was a small victory, a testament to resilience and self-respect. For Mason, each day was a reminder, bitter and unrelenting, of the price of betrayal. The city moved on, indifferent to both, yet the lives of these two souls, forever intertwined by love and heartbreak, continued to unfold in parallel, one embracing freedom, the other clinging to shadows. 2 years had passed since Caroline had walked away from the life she had shared with Mason. The city had changed in small, subtle ways, but more importantly, so had she. The years of pain, betrayal, and loneliness had given way to resilience, purpose, and joy she had never allowed herself before. Caroline was no longer defined by the shadow of love lost. She was illuminated by a light entirely her own. Her life had grown in ways that were tangible and profoundly fulfilling. Caroline had given birth to a beautiful baby boy, a child whose eyes mirrored the spark of hope and courage she carried within. Every smile, every small laugh, every tiny hand curled around her finger reminded her that love had not abandoned her. It had simply taken a new form, one untainted by deception. She had embraced motherhood with grace, learning the rhythms of sleepless nights, the tender hush of midnight feedings, the soft scent of baby lotion and fresh linen. Each moment strengthened her. Each challenge reinforced the truth she had always known. She could thrive on her own. Her apartment, modest yet filled with warmth, reflected her new life. Sunlight poured through sheer curtains, illuminating carefully chosen spaces where color, light, and creativity mingled. Caroline spent mornings with her son nestled against her, reading stories aloud or sketching tiny shapes that would become the foundation of imaginative worlds. She had discovered that joy could be simple, quiet, yet infinitely profound. Meanwhile, Mason's life had begun a slow, painful decline. The mansion, once a symbol of control and luxury, now felt hollow, suffocating, a stage for tension and resentment rather than comfort or love. Living with Evan had proven far more complicated than he had anticipated. Their interactions, at first seemingly a mutual curiosity or fleeting pleasure, had descended into constant friction. Evan's own ambitions clashed with Mason's ego, their once private affair now a labyrinth of awkward compromises, unspoken frustrations, and daily conflicts. Mason himself had deteriorated physically and emotionally. Meals were irregular, clothes often wrinkled, hair unkempt. He clung to his work obsessively, using deadlines and projects as shields to distract himself from the absence of warmth and connection he had once taken for granted. Yet even in the midst of professional success, there was an emptiness he could neither fill nor ignore. The silence of the mansion was deafening, punctuated only by the echo of his own regrets and fleeting attempts to recapture what was irrevocably lost. Caroline, by contrast, had flourished. She opened a small studio dedicated to teaching painting and crafts to children, a space alive with laughter, creativity, and curiosity. Her approach was unique. She encouraged imagination while nurturing confidence, guiding little hands to create worlds without judgment. Parents praised her warmth, her patience, and her ability to inspire children not only to paint, but to believe in themselves. Her own story, unspoken yet subtly present in every lesson, became a source of motivation for those around her. The studio quickly gained a reputation for excellence and warmth. Word spread, parents recommended Caroline to friends, and soon the space was alive with the hum of inspired young minds. Caroline herself radiated health and vitality. She moved through her day with a quiet strength, a graceful balance between ambition, care for her child, and personal fulfillment. The light in her eyes, once shadowed by betrayal, now shone with the glow of someone who had survived and flourished. Her reputation eventually reached beyond the local community. Invitations arrived to speak at gatherings, participate in panels, and attend ceremonies recognizing individuals who had made significant impacts on young lives. One day, she received an invitation to a prestigious ceremony honoring those who had inspired the next generation, a validation not only of her work, but of the life she had painstakingly built from fragments of heartbreak. Caroline accepted, not for recognition, but to stand as a testament to resilience, hope, and the possibility of new beginnings. Mason, in contrast, watched from the confines of his own world, as glimpses of Caroline's life reached him through social media and casual updates from mutual acquaintances. Every picture of her, vibrant and radiant with her son in her arms, every report of her studio's successes, felt like a stark mirror reflecting what he had lost. He had believed that wealth, influence, and a fleeting affair could replace love. Instead, he was left with tension, frustration, and the hollow echo of absence. Caroline, however, moved through these milestones with humility and grace. She did not flaunt her happiness. She simply lived it. Her son, the embodiment of hope and continuity, thrived in an environment filled with creativity, love, and stability. Caroline had become not only a mother but a role model, someone whose life demonstrated that strength, kindness, and integrity could outshine betrayal and misfortune. As the day of the ceremony arrived, Caroline dressed simply yet elegantly, choosing comfort for her son and dignity for herself. She held his hand tightly as they entered the hall, the soft murmur of applause and the warm lighting greeting them. Children clustered around her studio's table in the corner, already curious and eager to participate, and she smiled, guiding them gently. The audience watched, captivated not by extravagance, but by the authenticity of a woman who had rebuilt her life, who had turned sorrow into purpose. While Caroline's life radiated light, Mason's remained a study in shadows. He moved through his days mechanically, occasionally glancing at images or news of her accomplishments, each one a reminder of his failures, each one a silent accusation of choices made too late. The mansion, once a haven, had become a mausoleum of regrets, the walls echoing with the absence of love he had taken for granted. The contrast was undeniable. Caroline, vibrant, fulfilled and grounded, walking confidently into spaces filled with admiration and possibility. Mason, powerful yet hollow, caught in a cycle of tension and unrealized desire, haunted by the knowledge that the life he had tried to control had flourished without him. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony, rewarding the patient, resilient heart, while leaving the arrogant and unfaithful to wrestle with the consequences of their own choices. In her studio, Caroline guided a child's trembling hand over a sheet of paper, encouraging a hesitant stroke. "It's okay," she whispered, smiling warmly. "You can make it however you want." In that small act, the essence of her journey was captured: love given freely, nurturing without expectation, and the unshakable certainty that life, even after betrayal, could be beautiful, meaningful, and whole. Outside, Mason stared at his computer screen, papers scattered, his reflection on the glossy surface mocking him with the truth he could not escape. 2 years had passed, and the world had moved on. One life had grown, flourished, and inspired, while the other remained trapped in shadows and illusions, clinging to what could no longer be reclaimed. And somewhere in the quiet, Caroline held her son close, whispering words of hope, her heart full, her life unfolding exactly as it should. The past, with its pain and sorrow, was behind her. The future, bright, independent, and unbreakable, stretched forward, waiting for her to step into it fully, without fear, without regret, and with the kind of joy only a heart truly free could know. 2 years had passed since Caroline had rebuilt her life, and the night was alive with the low hum of conversation, clinking glasses, and the subtle scent of champagne mingled with roses. The gala hall sparkled under grand chandeliers, the kind of event reserved for the city's movers and shakers. Caroline entered quietly, her presence immediately drawing attention. She moved with elegance and ease, the soft sway of her gown tracing a silhouette that seemed untouched by the years of hardship. her smile warm yet composed. For Mason, the evening was a storm he had anticipated but could not fully prepare for. He arrived with Evan Turner, confident and polished, their hands lightly clasped, projecting an image of coupledom that drew curious glances and whispered speculation. Mason's eyes, however, were already scanning the room, seeking, anticipating, and ultimately freezing when they landed on her. Caroline. She was laughing lightly, animatedly speaking with a group of distinguished male guests, her gestures lively yet controlled. Her laughter, soft and genuine, pierced him like a physical sensation. The sight ignited something he had not felt in years, an uncontrollable surge of jealousy, mingled with the bitter sting of regret. He tried to steady himself, reminding his mind that they were divorced, that she had moved on, that his life, his world was his own. And yet, watching her, seeing her joy untainted by him, seeing the effortless way she carried herself, Mason felt an almost physical ache. Evan, noticing his tension, leaned slightly closer, whispering something trivial about the event. But Mason could not hear her words. His focus was entirely on Caroline. Without fully realizing it, Mason moved through the crowd, the world narrowing to the elegant figure laughing and gesturing across the room. "Caroline," he began, voice low and tense, attempting to mask the flurry of emotion beneath. Her eyes met his momentarily, and in that glance, she recognized the familiar storm she had once known so well. The need to control, the sudden flare of possessiveness, the unspoken claim he always seemed to assert when faced with her independence. Mason reached her, his voice sharper now, trembling with a mix of frustration and desire. "Why didn't you come to find me? Why are you laughing and talking with them like that?" His hand hovered near hers, not touching, yet demanding acknowledgement. The words, though simple, carried the weight of his ego, his jealousy, and the latent need to reclaim something he had lost. Caroline's expression remained calm, yet her eyes were cold and unyielding. She stepped back, creating a deliberate distance, her voice measured and precise. "You have no right to ask me that," she said, each word crisp, slicing through the tension of the moment. "We've been divorced for 2 years, Mason. I am no longer yours to question." Mason's chest tightened, a reflexive anger flaring within him. He opened his mouth, trying to form a response, something clever or conciliatory, but found himself grasping at air. Evan's presence at his side offered an anchor, yet he did not turn toward her. He could not. Mason's mind raced, trying to reconcile the elegant, radiant woman before him with the Caroline who had once walked away, leaving him hollow in the mansion they had shared. The group Caroline had been speaking with paused slightly, sensing the tension, their glances flicking between the trio. Caroline, acutely aware of the eyes on her, raised her chin, refusing to break composure. She could feel Mason's gaze burning into her, yet she would not yield. Not tonight, not ever again. This was her space, her life, her moment, and she would not allow it to be overshadowed by his unresolved possessiveness. She turned abruptly, moving away from him, her steps measured, echoing slightly against the polished marble floors. Mason instinctively reached out, but his hand stopped mid-air, suspended by the realization that any attempt to follow her would only underline the truth he refused to accept. Caroline had built a life independent of him, a life he had no claim to control. Evan, sensing his turmoil, spoke softly, her voice tinged with concern. "Mason, maybe it's time to let go." But he ignored her, his eyes tracking Caroline's retreating figure, following her with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Each step she took seemed to reaffirm her freedom, a freedom he had denied himself the courage to respect years ago. Caroline paused momentarily at the edge of the ballroom, gathering herself. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the lingering heat of anger and the remnants of old affection, twisted and reshaped by betrayal. She allowed herself a deep breath, feeling the steady rhythm of her life, her son's laughter echoing in her mind, the successful studio she had built, the respect and admiration she had earned. All of it reminded her why she had walked away, why she had insisted on her autonomy. Why Mason's presence, while stirring old emotions, could not dictate her actions. The murmurs of guests resumed around them, the clinking of glasses, the soft notes of the live band, and yet for Mason, the world had narrowed to the space where Caroline had stood, where her shadow had moved, and where he could not reach. His chest ached with longing, the bitter irony of their encounter crashing over him. The woman he had taken for granted was thriving, radiant, untouchable. And the life he had tried to grasp through control, wealth, and fleeting affection was nowhere near the fullness of hers. Caroline finally moved toward a quiet corner, her expression settling into calm, the storm of the encounter giving way to a serene determination. She reminded herself that no gesture, no glance, no attempt at intimidation could diminish her peace. She had fought for this life, built it from fragments of heartbreak, and she would protect it fiercely, tenderly, and without compromise. Mason remained in place, his hand slowly lowering, fingers brushing the air where she had been. Evan's presence beside him was suddenly a reminder of the hollow substitution of desire, a reminder that he had once believed superficial connection could replace authentic love. The contrast between their worlds, Caroline's vibrant, fulfilled life and his own shadowed existence, was impossible to ignore. And yet stubbornly, he clung to the hope that somehow she might still return, that the spark they had shared could be reignited despite the years, despite the betrayal, despite the distance. Caroline's departure left a silence in the room that felt palpable, almost tangible, as if the space itself recognized the finality of the moment. She moved toward the exit, her son's future, her studio, and the life she had cultivated guiding her steps. Every movement carried authority, grace, and unspoken pride. The ballroom's lights glimmered off her gown, echoing the brilliance she carried within herself. An inner glow that no jealousy, no accusation, no lingering shadow of Mason's presence could diminish. As the night continued around her, Caroline's resolve crystallized. She would continue to grow, to nurture, to inspire, and to live fully. Mason's flare of jealousy, the pain of seeing her thrive independent of him, was a reflection of his own failure, not a testament to her weakness. And though the encounter had stirred old memories, old desires, it had also reaffirmed her strength, her autonomy, and the unshakable truth that she had chosen herself and her son over everything else. Mason watched from across the room, the glow of the chandeliers casting fragmented reflections on the polished floors. For a moment, he saw only the Caroline he had lost, the woman who had walked away, the mother and creator who now commanded her own world. The ache was unbearable, but the lesson, bitter and undeniable, was clear. Some love, no matter how intense, cannot survive betrayal, and some hearts, no matter how desperate, cannot reclaim what has chosen a different path. And in that brilliance, in that distance between them, the first true measure of time and consequence settled. Caroline was free, radiant, and untouchable. Mason, despite his presence, could only observe, haunted by the reality that the life he had squandered was thriving without him, while the woman he had once held in his hands had grown beyond his reach. The gala had ended, the echoes of confrontation fading into memory, yet the impact lingered in ways Mason could not fully articulate. The night outside was quiet, streets glimmering under scattered streetlights, but inside the mansion, silence weighed heavily, pressing down on him with a force he could no longer deflect. Mason found himself in his private study, the grand room dark except for the faint glow of a single desk lamp. The walls, lined with books, accolades, and carefully curated photographs, felt oppressive rather than comforting. He sank into his leather chair, head in his hands, and allowed himself to remember. Not the betrayal, not the anger, but the small, intimate details of Caroline, the gentle lilt of her laughter, the light in her eyes when she smiled, the way she had moved through the kitchen preparing dinner, the subtle brush of her hand against his arm during quiet moments. For the first time in years, Mason saw clearly what he had lost. Every achievement, every acquisition, every indulgence in power and ego now seemed hollow compared to the depth of connection he had taken for granted. The realization struck him with brutal clarity. He had allowed pride, arrogance, and fleeting desire to destroy what had been genuine, irreplaceable love. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closing as the memories swirled around him. The mornings when she had greeted him with warmth, the evenings spent talking quietly over small meals, the spontaneous moments of laughter that had made his life richer, lighter, brighter. He could see her clearly in his mind. Not the woman at the gala, dazzling in her independence, but the Caroline who had once trusted him completely, whose love had been unselfish, unwavering, and pure. The mansion was silent, but Mason's mind was loud with regret, a cacophony of what-ifs and if-onlys that offered no solace. He could feel, with a sharp, almost painful awareness, that the world he had clung to, the wealth, the control, the superficial comforts, was meaningless without the woman who had once made it all matter. The next morning, drawn by an impulse he did not fully understand, Mason left the mansion. He drove through familiar streets, past the city's bustling life, until he found himself in front of Caroline's studio. The small building, unassuming yet warm, seemed almost to radiate life from within. Through the large glass windows he saw her, Caroline, radiant and calm, moving gracefully among children, guiding tiny hands in painting and crafts. Laughter filled the air, not forced or performative, but genuine, spontaneous, a soundtrack of joy he could no longer claim. Mason stopped outside, hidden behind a shadowed doorway. He did not enter. He simply watched, observing the woman who had built a life entirely separate from him, a life imbued with love, purpose, and serenity. Her presence in the studio was luminous, a stark contrast to the dim, lonely existence he had allowed himself to fall into. He whispered, almost involuntarily, his voice barely audible above the soft hum of activity inside. Now you really don't need me anymore." The words were heavy, laden with regret, longing, and the bitter taste of truth. For the first time, Mason recognized that love, once lost to betrayal and neglect, could not be forcibly reclaimed. It could only exist where it was nurtured, respected, and allowed to flourish, and he had destroyed that possibility. The clarity hit him fully. Caroline had thrived without him. She had taken her pain, her disappointment, and transformed it into growth, into purpose, into a life that was undeniably hers. And he had remained trapped in his own illusions, unable to see the depth of what he had abandoned until it was far too late. Mason's reflection in the studio window caught his attention. He saw a man aged not by time, but by loss, arrogance, and the absence of love's guiding light. His eyes, filled with unspoken apology and longing, remained fixed on her, yet he knew that no glance, no word, no attempt at reconciliation could undo the years or the choices that had led to this moment. He lingered for a long while, allowing himself the quiet agony of realization. He had been given everything, her love, her trust, her devotion, and had squandered it. And now, as he watched her laughter, the gentle care with which she nurtured the children, the serenity that enveloped her being, he understood the depth of what he had lost. Not just a woman, but a life, a future, a love that had once been his. Caroline, unaware of the shadowed figure observing from outside, continued her work with a natural ease, her heart light, her purpose clear. Mason felt a pang, a mixture of envy and awe, knowing that she had reclaimed everything he had failed to protect. The realization was a bitter lesson in humility, one that he would carry with him forever. Love, respect, and trust cannot be commanded, bought, or manipulated. They must be nurtured, cherished, and honored. Finally, Mason turned away from the window, taking a step back into the street. He did not reach for her, did not knock, did not call out. He knew the truth, harsh and undeniable. Caroline's life, her happiness, and her family were no longer contingent on him. He had lost the right to be part of that world. All he could do was acknowledge it, carry the weight of his mistakes, and perhaps, in some quiet internal way, learn what it meant to truly value someone before it was too late. The street was empty, the city moving around him as if life had continued without pause. Indifferent to the private heartbreaks it contained, Mason walked slowly, each step heavy, each breath a reminder of the depth of his loss. For the first time, he understood that true awakening was not about possession or control. It was about recognition, acceptance, and the humility to witness the beauty of what had been lost without entitlement or complaint. And as he disappeared into the distance, leaving the studio behind, Mason's whispered words echoed in the quiet night. "Now, you really don't need me anymore." It was not a declaration of anger, nor of defiance. It was the quiet acknowledgement of truth, the surrender to reality, and the first step toward a kind of understanding he had never possessed before. Outside, Caroline smiled at a child's successful painting, her laughter filling the room with warmth. Unaware of the man watching from afar, she was fully herself, free, radiant, and unbound. And in that moment, Mason understood what he had lost, what he had failed to protect, and the profound lesson of love's impermanence, its fragility, and its ultimate power to transform those who respect it and to humble those who do not. A year had passed since Mason had quietly walked away from Caroline's studio, leaving her life intact, untouchable, and fully her own. The city had shifted in subtle ways, but Caroline's world had blossomed. Her studio had grown in reputation and warmth, a haven of creativity and joy, where children painted, laughed, and discovered themselves under her gentle guidance. Today was special. Caroline had organized an exhibition of the students' artwork, a celebration of imagination, perseverance, and the little victories of childhood. The hall was filled with vibrant colors, miniature masterpieces carefully displayed on easels and walls, each a reflection of her teaching and the love she poured into her students. She moved gracefully among the children and parents, answering questions, offering encouragement, her laughter warm and sincere. Among the congratulatory messages and bouquets, one flower arrangement caught her attention. A single card rested against the bouquet, elegant yet understated. With a steady hand, she lifted it and read the note in Mason's familiar handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me the lesson of love and loss." Caroline paused, a soft smile curving her lips. She set the bouquet beside a painting, a small, vibrant work by a child depicting a family of 4 holding hands under a radiant sun. The symbolism was not lost on her. "Family is a place where you belong," she murmured to herself, her voice carrying the quiet wisdom she had earned. Only when both hearts guard it together. She straightened, letting the words settle in her mind. Not as a reflection of pain, but as a testament to lessons learned, boundaries respected, and love transformed into strength. Outside, the city streets glowed with the soft gold of late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Caroline stepped out, holding her son's small hand, his laughter ringing like bells in the fading light. Together, they walked down the street, where she and Mason had first met so many years ago, the cobblestones worn smooth by time and countless footsteps. Memories whispered along the edges of her mind. Not sorrowful, not lingering, but gentle reminders of the journey she had traversed. Across the street, Mason stood, observing quietly. His eyes followed Caroline and her son, the two of them moving with a grace, freedom, and joy he could no longer claim. He did not cross the street. He did not speak. There was no attempt to reclaim, to demand, or to intervene. For the first time, he understood the full measure of Caroline's independence, the life she had built from fragments of heartache into something beautiful, resilient, and untouchable. Caroline looked ahead, unaware of Mason's presence, her gaze soft but clear, her posture radiating calm authority. Her son skipped beside her, laughter bubbling, his small hand firmly in hers. The late afternoon sunlight painted her face in warm hues, illuminating the serenity and pride she carried. She was free, unburdened, and entirely herself, no longer tethered to the past, no longer shadowed by betrayal. Mason lingered for a long moment, the city's hum surrounding him, reflecting on the truth he had learned too late. Love could not be possessed, could not be coerced, and could not thrive where trust had been broken. Yet from a distance he felt an unexpected sense of peace. Caroline had grown, flourished, and claimed her life fully, and in witnessing her joy, he acknowledged the profound lesson she had taught him without intent. The courage to love and the strength to let go are the marks of true growth. Caroline continued walking with her son, the world unfolding around them in colors of possibility and hope. She did not glance back, but the warmth in her heart reflected the journey completed. Pain transformed into resilience, betrayal into wisdom, and love into a quiet, enduring strength. Mason remained across the street, a solitary figure watching but not intruding, understanding that some chapters of life are not meant to be rewritten. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light over Caroline's face as she led her son forward. Her silhouette, calm and radiant, carried the full weight of independence and triumph. In that moment, the city seemed to pause, not to mourn, not to judge, but to honor the quiet, unyielding power of a woman who had endured, healed, and emerged not only unbroken, but brilliantly alive. And so, the street held them in stillness. Caroline and her son moving forward, Mason observing from afar. Life continued, vibrant and unrestrained, a testament to love's endurance when given freely, its fragility when betrayed, and its ultimate redemption in those who embrace their own strength and freedom. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, betrayal, and personal growth. We hope Caroline and Mason's story has touched your heart and reminded you that true love requires trust, respect, and sometimes the courage to let go. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming romantic and emotional storytelling videos. Leave a comment below to share which part moved you the most or the lessons you took away from this story. We would love to hear from you.